Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this SCSA armchair session with Mr. Bryan Lloyd, Executive Director of Occupational Health and Safety at Labor Relations and Workplace Safety. If you caught the opening of our leadership conference from April of this year, you would have caught Minister Ken Cheveldayoff's comments about the OHS regulation review. That's currently underway and is right now into its second phase. Well, actually, Bryan is here to actually bring us our industry up to speed on this day today. And so let me introduce Bryan. Bryan's got 25 years of experience in OHS management, regulatory enforcement. He's currently the executive director of the OHS branch for the Ministry of Labor Relations and Workplace Safety. Previous positions have included chief occupational safety for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and corporate OHS program manager for the government of Saskatchewan. He is a Canadian registered safety professional, occupational health and safety technologist, and certified health and safety consultant. Welcome, Bryan.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yay. Man, you got a lot of safety in all your titles, so
maybe too much.
So, Bryan, I'm going to give everybody kind of the format for today and how this will go. I have asked Bryan if he would give background and an overview update on LRWS and the regulation review process in probably about 40 minutes-ish. Then I'll come back and share a few questions. Now, while we have some limited time today, I do encourage you that if you do have questions to pop them into the chat in the platform that you're using. I will try my best to try to cover a few off with Bryan, or at least write them down, as I think Bryan's also going to share a couple of addresses where people can ask further questions if they want some follow-up. And I should mention that if I haven't talked about this before, please follow, like, share, subscribe to this. We also have our e-newsletter with 30,000 subscribers right now. It's a great source of information and connects you with our staff for advice, training, certification, support, but also other information, much like what we're going to cover off today. So, Bryan, I'm pretty much going to just let you run with it. Again, thanks. I hope you're doing good today.
I'm doing great. I'm pleased to be here on a Monday afternoon during the lunch hour and sharing some of our work. It's great.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Bryan. I'm going to give you the reins and I'll come back in about 40 minutes.
Excellent. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I will share my presentation right now. Get started here. I think this is it. Should be able to see the slideshow. Like Collin said, I'm going to go through some updates for the branch. It'll mostly focus on the big project we have right now, which is a fulsome update and review of the OHS regulations. But I'll give you a little bit of background before we get there. Okay, who we are and what we do. Did we see that slide change for everybody? Yep, good. Okay. Essentially, our vision is safe, healthy workplaces throughout the province of Saskatchewan. Pretty simple. Mandate is to promote, support, and enforce safe work practices and employment standards. Fostering fair and balanced employment environment respects the rights, duties, and responsibilities of employees and employers, ensuring healthy, safe, productive workplaces. That's kind of our overarching vision and mandate. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. As the OHS branch, that means essentially we're a regulator, and we're a fairly large regulator in this province. We regulate occupational health and safety in the provincial jurisdiction, which is probably about 92-93% of the overall workforce. And as a safety regulator, we perform the tasks that you would expect. So we inspect, we investigate, we follow up on complaints, we follow up on injuries, inquiries. We work with stakeholder groups like the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association and a host of others. We're always looking at continuing to develop safe work practices and looking for consistent application of our legislation. We do have a partnership with the WCB. And so when you see the WorkSafe Saskatchewan brand, just recognize that that's the WCB and us as the OHS regulator in partnership, and we create that WorkSafe Saskatchewan brand. WorkSafe Saskatchewan provides a lot of services. There's all the consulting services you would expect, as well as training, awareness, strategic direction and orientation. WorkSafe is currently going through a rebrand, and I believe later this week, actually on Wednesday, Minister Cheveldayoff will be announcing publicly the formal rebrand of WorkSafe Saskatchewan. So pretty important week for us on the WorkSafe front. There's been a lot of work done on that rebrand. So check it out this week on your social media feeds, potentially on the news. You should see a fairly large and significant rebrand of the WorkSafe brand. So that's great. Within that WorkSafe partnership, the key document for us when it comes to strategic direction is the fatalities and serious injury strategy. So there's actually been two versions of this. There was the first one that rolled out. It was a 3-year strategy, kind of 2019 to about the end of 22. Was effective. And then we basically went back to the drawing board, refined it, tweaked it a little bit, and rolled it out into the Fatality Serious Injury Strategy 2.0. We enhanced it from being a 3-year strategy to a 5-year strategy. And really that's where we're at right now. And that strategy focuses on the 3 key sectors that have significant serious injury and fatalities. That's healthcare, transportation, and then you folks, construction. And really it has kind of 2 primary streams. It's got the prevention and learning stream, so mostly led by our WCB colleagues, although we certainly do chip in on some of that. And then there is a regulatory and enforcement stream as well, which for many of these interventions for us is kind of that baseline compliance and enforcement, as well as some targeted intervention, targeted field campaigns, some blitzes by our officers at certain times. That really makes up the overall strategy. Ministry goals, we got a couple key goals. Our first goal is to reduce injuries in the province. Probably not surprising as an OHS regulator, that's what you would expect that we ought to be doing. Our current goal right now is to reduce the time loss injury rate in this province out to 2030. So this was a previous commitment made by Minister Don Morgan at the time, who was the Minister of Labour for the province. And we're continuing to work towards that injury reduction goal. The positive thing is the 2025 results came in for last year, and again, lowest injury rates that we've seen in the province, 3rd year in a row. And at this current trend right now, if we follow the 25 numbers, we are projected to be able to hit that goal of reducing the injuries in this province by a quarter out to 2030. So we're on track, very positive. And like I say, a lot of that work we actually do through our WorkSafe Saskatchewan partnership. Goal 2, this one's a little bit broader, and this one relates to the entire Saskatchewan Employment Act, not just OHS. But we have a goal of making sure that our employment law is up to date, and that we are fostering that culture of compliance. We want to see employers in the province complying with the Saskatchewan Employment Act, whether it's related to collective bargaining or on the labor standards front, which is payment of wages, or on the OHS side, which is ensuring that workers work safely and get home at the end of the day. Goal 3, and this one's really going to kind of take us to the heart of the presentation that we have today, and that's ensuring that our legislation remains relevant in a changing workplace. And we have seen things change dramatically in this last year when you look at the trade challenges that we've had, tariffs, everything to do with US, moving some of our export products out of Canada. Lots of change. really dynamic, and it's critical that our legislation remains current, remains relevant, and reflects the current environment of the labor market in the province. So that really, it kind of takes us into where we're at, which is, okay, Collin has said you guys are doing an OHS regulation review, an update. What does that look like? Well, first, let's start about two parts to this. There's the Saskatchewan Employment Act. So that's the actual act and legislative framework that sets up the regulations. And then there's the regulations. They're two different pieces, and how you amend an act versus a regulation. There's some similarities, but essentially they're quite a bit different. So the act sets out broad rules, who's responsible for what are the authorities, what are the codes, what are directives, general duty clauses, responsibilities. It helps define all the workplace parties, sets up that overarching framework. Then the regulations set out all the detail. And for folks that have worked with the Saskatchewan OHS regs know that they're large. It's 326 pages of regulations. It's a blend of performance-based and prescriptive regulations. So in some cases, the performance-based will hit towards an internal responsibility system. Say it's up to the workplace to kind of figure it out. It might use some general terms like, well, you just need to ensure that the supervisor is competent. Well, what does competent mean? Well, that they have the experience, training, and knowledge to be able to do the work safely. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do it, just set out general performance-based goals. Then there's the prescriptive stuff. So maybe when it's using a ladder, we might be very specific about the type of ladder, the angle of the ladder, the pitch of the ladder, the makeup of the ladder, and be very, very prescriptive in terms of exactly how a ladder gets used. So our regulation, like many of the OHS regulations, is kind of a blend of performance-based and prescriptive elements. So when we look at the act, what's the legislative process for that? Well, the first thing is you have to get the government in power, so cabinet, to make a decision that, yep, we are going to review or amend or add new legislation into the legislative framework of the province. So that's the first piece. You got to get approval from cabinet, from the minister, from the government to do so. After you've achieved that authority, the next stage is you better consult with stakeholders in a meaningful way. And so stakeholder engagement will occur. There's many different ways that can look like, but you have to have some meaningful engagement with stakeholders. Then once you've done all that stakeholder engagement, there needs to be an analysis. What did we hear? What are the stakeholders saying? What's the labor side of the equation say? What are the employers saying? What does industry need? What does the sector need? Where are the challenges? Where is there redundancy? Where are there problems with the regs? Where's regs outdated? Where are portions of the regs that things don't make sense anymore because technology's changed? So once all of that analysis is done, essentially that comes back and cabinet reviews that analysis and the direction that the legislation is going to be amended or proposed. And then a bill is introduced. And that's really kind of the first sense that you know, okay, there's something going on with the act. There's something going on with legislation because there's a reading in the Legislative Assembly where government can be questioned on this proposed bill. That's really kind of the first time you get a sense that it's going through the ledge. So you have first reading at the Legislative Assembly, and then it becomes public document. Everybody can see what the proposed act amendment is going to be, what it's going to look like. Then there's a second reading and a debate. So the minister, so in our case, Minister of Labor, would explain the purpose of the bill in front of the Legislative Assembly. MLAs on both sides of the coin would be able to debate it, so both the government and the opposition. And then from there, it would go to a committee stage. So there's a committee established of both government and opposition, and they will go through the various clauses of the bill in detail, and the minister, sometimes officials, so myself, will respond to questions that the committee may have. Once you get through that process, then it goes to a third reading. So this is kind of the final debate on the bill. It's the last chance for the Legislative Assembly to have some open public debate on the changes to the Act or the introduction of a new piece of legislation. And once you get through that third reading and it's all done, it goes to the Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor gives royal assent, and essentially that act comes into force either immediately on royal assent, so that's as soon as the Lieutenant Governor has completed their royal assent, or it can be on a specified date in the future. And we recently did that, it was 2 years ago. We amended the act as it related to workplace violence. And prior to that, it used to be you only needed to have a violence policy and a violence prevention plan if you were in certain sectors, if you were a prescribed place of employment. Then the legislation was amended so that all employers were required to have a violence policy and prevention plan. So when that change came into effect under the Act, it was given a 1-year period of time for that to come into effect. So the Lieutenant Governor will say, yep, the legislation has been amended and it will come into full force and effect on March 31st of 2023, a 1-year period of time. So those are really kind of the two coming into force dates, either immediately on royal assent or at a specified date in the future. Sometimes it makes sense to go immediately, and sometimes it makes sense to phase it in. So that's what the amending an act looks like. And now here's what amending a regulation looks like. So for us, the OHS regs, and it looks a little different. First thing, you have to get government's authority to be able to open up the regs for amendment. So that first step. Does the Minister of Labor want this done? Does Cabinet want this done? Does Premier want this done? Great, got approval. Okay, now you can go forth and open up those regs. So we've completed that. That was obtained last year. And then you go to stakeholder engagement. And you'll see later on in this presentation, because the OHS regs are so large, 320 pages of regs, we've broken it into 3 distinct phases. So there's a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3. So for us, stakeholder engagement needs to ensue immediately, after you get authority to open them up. And so we did stakeholder engagement last fall. We're looking at doing another round of stakeholder engagement this coming fall. After you've done stakeholder engagement, even for just phase 1, you have to go into the analysis stage. You have to basically put together trends, themes of what you've heard from stakeholders, where the regs ought to be changed, what are the reasons for them being changed, how does it relate to reducing red tape, how does it comport with the government's growth plan and economic objectives of the province, how does it relate to harmonization or mutual recognition, kind of all of those pieces. So we're currently just wrapping up our analysis phase for phase 1. And then the next step is there'll be some proposed amendments that will go forward to Cabinet. So after we've done analysis and done some work with Justice in terms of legislative drafting on regs, then it goes to Cabinet. And essentially Cabinet gets a document that says, this is where we're looking at changing the regs. This is what we've heard from stakeholders. These are where the regs need to be amended for the following reasons. We'll often do a side-by-side. So the regulations look like this, and then beside it, this is what the proposed regulations will look like in the future. And here's kind of the impacts. Cabinet reviews that, and once they're comfortable with all of those proposed amendments, they provide approval. And then the regulations are filed with the registrar and then published into Saskatchewan's Gazette. So you'll notice that there's no reading in the ledge, there's no debate, first, second, third reading, there's no debate of these regs. Basically, they go through Cabinet. Once Cabinet's comfortable with them, They get published in the Gazette. So then that's the first time that the public gets kind of notice that, hey, look, these regs are about to change, and this is what the language looks like. And then after they're published, they come into force on the filing in the Gazette, or same thing, it could be specified to a date in the future, much like those violence provision changes. I think for the purposes of these OHS reg amendments, they will just come into force directly upon filing. Because it's a fulsome review of the entire regs, it doesn't make sense to set some of this stuff out to a future in the date. So that's kind of the difference between regs and act. And like I say, the biggest piece is you're just not getting the same number of readings and debate in the legislative assembly. The big piece is once it gets posted in the Gazette, that's likely to come into effect. So another question is, well, when was the last time that we opened up the OHS regs in this province for a really thorough review? Well, it hasn't been since 2006. So that's 20 years. That's a long time. It doesn't mean that the regs haven't been amended in 20 years. They have been, but they've kind of been amended on a piece-by-piece basis, where there's been something that needed to get addressed. There's been private member bills that have kind of come forward and put some pressure on government. Government said, yeah, let's make some changes here and let's make some changes there. We've had to make a few changes as it relates to harmonization of OHS all across Canada. There were some pretty drastic and immediate changes to the regs during COVID. Certainly, there were some amendments that had to be made within a week period of time, and then in some cases 4 months later, those amendments were repealed and no longer in the regs. But the last time we did a really fulsome review where they were opened up front to back was 20 years ago. So what do we expect to accomplish out of this? What's the purpose of this? We need to ensure that our legislation remains relevant and meets the needs of the employers, industries, sectors, and workers out there in the provinces. There's been a lot of changes, not just in terms of geopolitical trade, but technology. There's been a lot of emphasis on reducing interprovincial trade barriers in Canada. There's been, especially in the construction sector, a lot of push on making sure that labor mobility is optimized. So those will be a lot of the amendments that we'll be looking at putting through. And who do the regs apply to? Like I say, over 90% of the workplaces in the province are provincially regulated. The only real federal jurisdiction workplaces in the province for us is aviation. So the aviation sector, the big players like Air Canada, WestJet, the airports, all the subsidiaries, rail, the CPs, the CNs, big rail companies, interprovincial trucking, grain and grain handling is a big one in this province, and those are still federal. And then there's some smaller other ones like communications, banking, and some of those others. But by and large, most of the province is provincially regulated when it comes to OHS. Stakeholder regulatory review. So when we consult with stakeholders, who are we looking at getting input from? Well, employers, safety associations, just like this one, unions, all the big ones, and lots of smaller unions chip in too with good stakeholder feedback. Other government ministries. So when we did our first round, we had 12 different ministries, I think, that actually put in formal submissions. And the reason for that is there's other ministries within government that can be impacted by these changes. So for example, trade and export development, they've got a big stake in harmonization and reducing trade barriers. Immigration and career training, apprenticeship, lots of various government stakeholders that can be impacted by our regs. So we certainly get submissions from them. Industry associations like construction associations, and then the public. We get a lot of submissions from the public, maybe from advocates or university profs, researchers who have opinions, and they will submit those as well. So I haven't really been tracking questions in chat, but I'm just peeking over there right now. Got one here from Tricia. Will there be potential updates to legislation applicable to agriculture? Really good question. So, and absolutely, that one's under analysis. Agriculture is still covered under OHS legislation. I think that one's people are often confused by that. There is no real exemption for the agriculture sector in this province. The only exception is on some of those small farms, especially family farms. There might not be jurisdiction because there's not a classic employer-employee relationship. And so for a lot of small kind of family farms, yeah, the Saskatchewan Employment Act doesn't apply because there's not a classic employer-employee relationship. But if there is, and you're a farm and you have employees and workers, and there's a classic employer-employee relationship, the OHS provisions apply. In the regs, the only real exception is how it relates to the training of powered mobile equipment. So if you're in the ag sector and you're working in ranching or grain handling, your requirement for training on how to operate a tractor, a grader, a swather, a combine, an excavator, training requirements are a bit different for agriculture. They don't have the same requirements that you would see in construction sector, but that's really the only exception. So we are, as part of the reg review, looking at powered mobile equipment training. We are looking at other areas of agriculture, but I think it's important just to understand the entire agriculture sector is not exempt from OHS. It does apply whenever there's an employer-employee relationship. So good question, Tricia. How will we prioritize these? We prioritize, complete engagement, full inclusive engagement with stakeholders throughout the process. We want as much input as we can possibly get. So the OHS review, when did this start? Like I say, I'm going to show you in a couple slides here. We broke it into 3 bite-sized pieces. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 rolled out in the beginning of October of 2025, and then it closed for stakeholder engagement on November 30th. That's kind of the dates around there. I got another question here from Christopher. Is there a time frame that has been discussed as to when the review and updates are meant to be completed and rolled out? There is. We have a detailed project plan, but because there's so many approvals related to government approval, cabinet approval, minister approvals, we kind of outline timeframes in terms of seasons. So we consulted on phase 1 back in October, November of last year. We're completing the analysis now. We're likely to go to drafting here in the summer. If everything goes according to plan, we could see amendments related to phase 1, which is parts 1 to 5 of the regs, come into effect by the end of this calendar year or maybe end of fiscal year. We expect phase 2 to roll out in the fall, and I got a couple slides that'll kind of speak to that. And before I switch slides, one more question. Is specific minimum worker required for agriculture implementation? No minimum workers. If there's an employer-employee relationship and you have 1 employee, then the OHS legislation applies. Okay, so phase 1, like I said, that's parts 1 to 5 of the regs. So parts 1 to 5, what does that look like? A lot of that is the general duty pieces. It's supervisors, employees, employer responsibilities, contractors, prime contractors, kind of all of the general pieces, OHCs, health and safety committees, that kind of stuff. Part 5, the last one, was first aid. So it kind of ends with first aid. What does stakeholder engagement look like? We had really good submissions. I think we had just shy of 100 submissions by all kinds of various stakeholders, associations, employers, sectors, various trade unions, various members of the public. just kind of on par with what you would expect for any kind of amendment to labor legislation. Next phase 2. So we know that that's going to be part 6 to 11 of the regs. So getting into a lot more detailed portions. Powered mobile equipment's in there, PPE is in there, machinery, machine guarding's in there. There's a lot more detail in 6 to 11. I expect stakeholder engagement for that to open up in late August, maybe September of this fall. There'll be lots of media and communication, letters, email updates, just an entire media campaign will roll out for that. But I expect that to excuse me, roll out August, September. And then the last or part phase 3, what does that look like? That will probably roll out for stakeholder engagement in year 2027, so next year. And that will be the entire remainder of the OHS regs. So parts 12 to 34. We'll probably have to look at that one a little bit differently. And some of them, they're so technical and so few workers actually work in those domains. So for example, diving. We don't have a lot of workers that dive in the province of Saskatchewan as part of their job. We'll probably just consult directly with those various stakeholders. Same with explosives. You know, we've got seismic, we've got demolition. Not a lot of other workers are working with explosives. We'll probably consult directly with those impacted stakeholders. And that will, like I say, phase 3 will probably roll out in 2027. That one will be a little bit more challenging just because it is so voluminous and so technical. So this next round of engagement, which is phase 2, part 6 to 11, you now know it's going to roll out in the fall. Well, what are those areas? Here's what they are. Part 6 is general health requirements, so sanitation, lighting, shower rooms, change rooms, washrooms, drinking water, potable drinking water, smoking. You know, so for example, right, our legislation says can't smoke in the workplace. We'll probably need to add vaping. You know, those kind of amendments to make it current. Ergo's in there, radiation, and exposure control plan. That one really got highlighted during COVID. And so that one probably have our attention to make sure that it's applicable in a broad sense moving forward. What's part 7 look like? PPE. And this one, I'll be honest, is going to be, the amendments on this one are going to be driven a lot by our duty as it relates to harmonization. So over the last several years, there's been a big push on OHS regulators harmonizing on PPE across Canada. So if you're working as a construction worker in Ontario and you take a job here at a big commercial job in Saskatchewan, all the requirements should be the same. And that includes PPE. So if it's a CSA approved hard hat in Ontario or the Maritimes, then that should be the same in Saskatchewan. Same for safety glasses, same for respirators, same for any kind of PPE. So there are still a couple areas that we need to tweak in part 7 to ensure that we're harmonized with the rest of Canada, but a lot of focus on harmonization. And the goal of that is just to make sure that we don't have those interprovincial trade barriers, and that especially as it relates to construction workers, there's that no barriers related to labor mobility. You can move from job to job without having to use different equipment. You know, potentially we're looking at training next and trying to reduce some of those barriers as it relates to redoing training. Part 8, this one's on noise. So there's gonna be some good examination of these requirements. Saskatchewan's one of the few jurisdictions that doesn't require baseline audiometric testing. Certainly going to want to consult on that, take a look at that. Part 9, safeguards, storage. So certainly going to be looking at handrails, fall protection, cleaning up some language around guardrails and as a component of static fall protection system. Traffic control plans as it relates to vehicular traffic, signalers, rigging, slinging, that kind of stuff. Machine safety, part 10 is going to be around guarding on equipments. Lockout, tagout is going to be reviewed. A lot of machinery that is related to the manufacturer's specs and manufacturer's instructions, making sure that our legislation is kind of aligned to that principle of what the manufacturer states for machine operation. And then the last one in phase 2 is a biggie, and that's powered mobile equipment. And again, this one will, it's a good example on those agriculture questions. This is the only area in the OHS regs where agriculture has an exception. And that one basically says that ranching or farming activities, if you're operating powered mobile equipment on the farm, you don't have the same requirements for PME training as, for example, a construction worker would. And kind of makes sense when you think about them operating swathers and tractors and other equipment on a farm. How to get involved in the OHS Reg Review. Probably the best domain at this point is just going into the Saskatchewan.ca website. As soon as you get into that website, you'll see an area called Public Engagement. It's really obvious. It's as soon as you get in there, click on Public Engagement, and when OHS is up there for stakeholder engagement, you'll see it clearly outlined. There's the link from Amber, wonderful. There'll be discussion guides provided to be able to help formulate, okay, this is what we're looking at. These are the areas of the regs. These are some of the areas that we want to examine and focus on. The discussion guides can be really helpful in terms of helping you focus and draw attention to a good submission. Check our website regularly. We regularly provide updates on it. WorkSafe Saskatchewan, our partnership with WCB, will be promoting the reg reviews through there. We still send out letters from our deputy minister to key stakeholders like the SCSA and Saskatchewan Construction Association, key employers in the sector. So there's kind of lots going on around that. And when you hear about it, certainly, please, we welcome any submissions. Okay, I got another question here. What are the current regulatory requirements in Saskatchewan for regular workplace safety reporting, including frequency, contact, submissions, obligations, and how do these requirements differ based on employer size, industry, and incident thresholds? Good question. And so in phase 1, this was certainly one of the areas we did a lot of consulting on. So there are requirements around dangerous occurrence reporting, and those dangerous occurrences are all defined. We're certainly looking at making sure that those are current and reflective of the workplace. There's requirements around reporting serious injuries and what the thresholds are for that. Currently, it's 72-hour hospitalization. That piece is really being examined. There's kind of various pieces, but those are kind of the key ones: dangerous occurrences, serious injuries, fatalities. They need to be reported to us, immediately. Certainly engaged on, well, what exactly should those timeframes be? So when you start to see some amendments roll out from phase 1 this year, they'll be directly related to those questions proposed right in here, the obligations for reporting and timeframes. And really, yeah, that was all I had for updates as of today on the reg review. For me, I will say it's a very exciting project to work on, to be able to amend a piece of regulation that is this large, this significant, that plays such a huge role in various sectors, construction especially. It's a privilege for me to work on this one. The changes will be based on what the government wants to see for changes, right? So when these changes come out, it's not necessarily what I would want to see as an OHS professional. There'll be those elements in there. My first concern is always worker safety. What are we doing in the regulations to ensure worker safety? But there's other elements at play currently right now within the government. And a lot of it has to do with harmonization. mutual recognition. How can we increase labor mobility across Canada? How can we reduce interprovincial trade barriers? How can any of the amendments align to Saskatchewan's growth plan, which is essentially making Saskatchewan an environment that's optimum for capital investment and future growth in this province? This province is committed to doing red tape reduction. So if we're going to make an amendment, it can't add a whole lot of administrative barriers to employers and sectors and workers and supervisors. There has to be some of that, those reasonable amendments. So those are kind of what the amendments will look like. Those are kind of our key guiding things. Does it improve worker safety? Does it help with labor mobility? Does it harmonize? Is there mutual recognition? How is it ensuring that our environment is optimum for growth? Those are key pieces in what the regs will look like when they get amended.
Bryan, that was very detailed. Excellent presentation. Appreciate it. And please continue, folks, to drop questions in the chat. We'll try to catch as many as we can. Bryan, you talk about clearly there's a lot of interprovincial influences on this regulatory review and the intention by government. Just if you can give us a sense of what kind of consultation with other provinces or at the national level is generally expected as this process kind of unfolds?
Yeah, really good question, Collin. So when we go through the reg review through those phases 1, 2, and 3, we don't necessarily send out stakeholder engagement documents to the other provinces and say, hey, we're looking at changing our regs. What do you think? Instead, how that looks is we do a lot of jurisdictional scans and environmental scans, and then they make up the analysis piece. So when we hear from stakeholders, we want to hear from just Saskatchewan stakeholders. But then when we go to make the proposed amended change, a lot of it's based on those J scans, environmental scans from other provinces, right? Okay, now how are we ensuring alignment? How are we ensuring harmonization? And then when it comes to us all agreeing to harmonize to the same standards, that really goes through the Canadian Association of Administrators of Labor Legislation, CAL. And so each of the provinces sit down in this CAL group, and we agree on areas that we need to align, and then we sign off. Each Minister of Labor or government representative from government will sign off on an agreement. And the agreement is basically the Pan-Canadian Occupational Health and Safety Free Trade Agreement, the RCT agreement, where each province and territory commits to making a regulatory change so that we have harmonized on a single thing. And a good example of that is almost all of the PPE elements in first aid.
Right.
Each province and territory made a commitment. We signed on to a formal Pan-Canadian Trade Agreement document saying, yes, we will do that within this period of time. And then ministers, you can be confident that the requirement for first aid will be the same all across Canada. Doesn't matter if you're in PEI, Quebec, Saskatchewan, it's the same.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. You know what? There's a question from Christopher here that
Sure.
I think falls in the same space there, just regards to harmonization and labor mobilities. If other provinces have a more strict or more stringent regulation, what should Saskatchewan expect to see? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And certainly that one's really come up over this last year as we look at how can we align training, OHS training requirements. When we work through the PPE stuff, you're right. There were areas where, okay, the CSA standard might be a little higher than maybe an ANSI standard from the US, but it was fairly agreeable for us to align on that and say, no, we'll just refer to the CSA standard. In Saskatchewan, we're lucky that under my authority as the executive director, I can actually select other standards and make them approved. So we could have a situation where we say, well, yeah, we'll use the CSA standard and an ANSI. So it wasn't too difficult. But as we work through training, there's all jurisdictions are really, really cautious that we don't want to have a race to the lowest standard and have everybody drop. But we also don't want to be caught in a situation where we're all trying to elevate and then put undue economic factors onto the labor market. So right now it's kind of picking those ones where you're not forcing provinces to really have to move to a higher bar quickly. It's where things are relatively close, and maybe if we adopt a more stringent level, impacts are low, economic impacts are low, impacts to you, Collin, and your members are relatively low, and we try and pick those easier ones.
Yeah, no, thanks for that answer. Our reality is that often the challenge when people are moving from province to province and they're working with their various safety associations, they'll notice some of the training might be a little bit different. That's typically in response to the regulatory differences that we're seeing. So, this, going down this particular direction may be of great benefit to a lot of our members. Can I ask a question in terms of how the ministry and what you kind of expect in terms of how we might respond to kind of the evolving construction hazards? Like, we've got new types of equipment, we have new types of materials, technologies used in a completely different way, techniques in terms of installation or how we might erect a building. It looks very different than probably what we would have seen 20 years ago in our last major kick at this. What do you see, Bryan, on this?
So I would say, in those areas where we know that technology is really coming on quick and it's going to have big impacts, like maybe look at AI.
Okay.
Right. So AI is coming in and it's already see it being used in a safety application in lots of places.
Right.
Being used obviously for critical risk assessments, but also now starting to be used for guarding, machine guarding, right? And AI doing that. So when we've got a sense that AI might have an influence on things, and we're in that area of amending the regs, what we want to do is then trying to lean towards a performance-based standard. So let's not be prescriptive and say, okay, for guarding, you need to make sure that you're staying, 3 feet away from this opening. Instead, shift to more of a performance-based that sets up a general framework that no matter how quick technology evolves, there's still the performance standard that whatever you do and whatever you choose to do still meets this basic standard. And so I would say in those areas where we know that there's really dramatic technological changes, it's massage the wording in the legislation so it's more performance outcome based. Ensure that the worker remains safe by these principles. Now use whatever you need to.
Right. And so even some of the technology that our members are using with our analytics platform to help kind of predict where should they put their emphasis in terms of their own safety program. There might be some those would probably be some examples of how a company prioritizes what's it's going to focus on. This is a lot of big companies, I would assume, would be submitting information on this or giving their perspective and participating in this. But we're a province of small businesses, and so I want to emphasize the folks who are watching this and maybe get your perspective. Why do you feel it's really important that particularly small and medium-sized contractors and workers participate, in this particular process?
So that's the question to me, or so reframe that for me again. What's the question again?
Yeah. So we've got lots of small businesses.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't necessarily see themselves as participating in this consultation process because often it's larger players. But is it just as important to have a small company participate in this process as a big one?
Sure.
What do you?
For sure.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree. And so when you look back at the 90 some odd submissions that we got for phase one, there were some small employers, like under 20 employers, I think there were a couple even under 10. Those are important submissions. We absolutely want to hear from small business, and we know that it's a lot more challenging circumstances for some of those small businesses. They just don't have the resources, right, necessarily to be able to manage safety as large organizations. So yes, that impact from small business is huge. And I'll say probably the area that we apply it the most is anything to do with red tape reduction.
Yeah.
So the moment one of our internal processes, once we've got our head wrapped around where we think that the regs need to be amended, and we've done the analysis, and this is what we've heard, we have to then take it to another ministry and defend that change from the perspective of red tape reduction. And that's where we put on our small business hat and say, okay, that's great. Now show us that this doesn't harm small business. Show us that this makes things easier in terms of red tape reduction. And so, I would say that that's kind of the safeguard in amending legislation in Saskatchewan, is having to go through that really rigorous red tape reduction committee review, and it's got to make sense to small business, or they won't allow that amendment to go through.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, then, for where can people, find what they need to do to kind of understand this or prepare, or to be able to, put together a good submission, and where would those materials be, and when would you expect to see those out?
Yeah, certainly. So you can reach out to our shop. You can follow the Saskatchewan.ca public consultations piece. SCSA is another good option. I mean, you guys get letters directly from our deputy saying, "Yep, we're now open up to this."
Right.
You could work with yourself, Collin, and say, "Okay, how exactly are our submissions going to look like? Will SCSA be doing a submission that kind of captures what the members are already hearing, so they can work with you?" Here, this portion of the website on public engagement lays it all out. I think this is probably the best starting spot, is this SAS.ca portal on public stakeholder engagement. So get everything you need. You can follow up with me. You can follow up with you, Collin.
Right.
And I think we can get everybody on the right page.
Yeah, for sure. And at the very bottom of that screen there, people can find where the regulations are. There's a link right. It says Occupational Health and Safety Regulations 2020. People can open that up. It's a nice big document. They're looking for a lot of pages for something to try to read at night. But there's critical information that I think, particularly for small businesses, that there may be something in there that right now might be an irritant or a barrier for you to be able to fully participate, that people should really take a look at, write down their suggestions, and either through the email address that's provided, to be able to make a submission on that. So
may have missed one question. I'm looking through the chat here. No, that's okay. I think it was me. So there's one that I may have missed. Do we consider chemical storage capacity as well?
Oh, yeah.
So good question. That will be examined, and there's kind of 2 or 3 pieces to this one. So typically when we talk about chemicals, that's hazardous products. So then that becomes WHMIS, and then all provinces this is probably a great example of harmonization. This was done in the late 80s, where all the provinces basically took into consideration the Hazardous Products Act from Health Canada, and we rolled out WHMIS across Canada. So some of it, when we talk about chemical storage, has a WHMIS component to it. There's another piece that chemical storage, especially if it's flammable and combustible, then it has a National Fire Code component. And so the amount of volume that it has now relates to the National Fire Code. And then within our own regs too, we have some basic parameters around chemical storage. So it will be examined, but understand it's kind of bigger and broader than just the regs.
Yeah. So for folks watching, we do have up on the screen a QR code. You pop your phone up against the screen there. That'll take you right to that reg review page. Folks will be able to to find the parts, the process, and where they can submit questions on that. Bryan, we're almost at the top of the hour here. So
perfect. You filled it up.
Yeah, you filled it up well. Any final thoughts you have before we wrap this up?
No, I just very much appreciate the opportunity to talk about this today. Here's the thing: is by sitting in this session today, you've got a heads up that in 4 months from now, phase 2 is going to roll out for public engagement, which means parts 6 to 11 of the regs. This gives you 4 months to kind of get your thoughts in order, figure out how we're going to get a submission in that best represents construction. And you got lots of time during the summer to be able to get that done. And when this rolls out, it won't be a big surprise for everybody. you'll have all your ducks in a row, and you'll be able to make a submission that represents the construction industry really well come this fall. So I think today was a good session, really good timing for a session.
Yeah, no, this is excellent. Thank you. This will be, I know there was a question earlier in the chat, but this will be posted online. We'll probably have a link to our e-newsletter, which I mentioned about earlier. And it'll also be on our YouTube channel and some of our other social media channels too. So we'll be able to push this out as information, particularly as we get closer to that consultation window and that August-September window. And so we'll have this out a couple of times, I think, before then. And Bryan, you've got, if people do have questions again, you had an email address in the chat. I think it's ohs.general@gov.ca.
That's
it.
As
well as a 1-800 number. You'll see some of our other opportunities to be able to connect on that. Folks, and part of today's session, if there's any surprises or cool things you thought, hey, that was really interesting, I'd love to get your feedback on it. Bryan, thank you again for taking the time to do this. This was very informative. Timing is excellent, and it's going to be really important for us. Please check this back out on our website. Check our e-newsletter. Just a reminder, the services got available. Great source of information for folks to connect your staff with our team. We'll have a bit of a backgrounder here on Bryan's presentation, of course, through a link. And Bryan, I think that's about it.
Always appreciate sharing lunch with you.
Okay, I might actually eat something this time.
Same here.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.